and welcome to Breaking Down, the series where we take an in-depth look at a Fire Emblem unit from a gameplay perspective. Before we start, I would like to thank the people who have backed the channel on Patreon, where for just £1 a month, you can vote on the next unit to be released in this series. More on this at the end. Today we will be looking at the School of Sorcery graduate, Annette. Whilst this series is not focused around plot, there is always a chance for spoilers, and certain elements of the game and its structure and story will inevitably be mentioned. So if that is a concern for you, feel free to give it a miss. Also, where relevant, this is considering the maddening difficulty on a regular new game file with no exploits or excessive grinding. Annette is a member of the Blue Lions, which means if you choose them as your house, she will be available from Chapter 1. If you opt for one of the other two houses, you will need to recruit her. Like with most students, you can circumvent her requirements if you get Byleth support with her to a B rank, where she can ask to join your house on any day following this. Otherwise, her recruit requirements lie in Faith and Magic, with these changing based on Byleth's support rank with her. Whilst the Magic requirement is very low, it's unlikely Byleth will want to invest heavily into Faith early to get past the D+ required at the B rank, so in most cases, just letting her auto-join from this will usually be easier. However, if you did want to grab her with more reliability, Byleth's Faith can be raised pretty quickly once the budding talent in the area is mastered, meaning it isn't too difficult to meet any of Annette's recruit requirements either. Annette's personal ability is, well, it's called Perseverance, but what it is Rally Strength. This allows her to use the Rally command, and when she does, she will grant an adjacent ally +4 strength until the start of the next player phase. By itself, this is a fairly okay ability, but in conjunction with the rest of her kit, it actually ends up being very useful. We will go into more details on this later, but Annette has other rallies in her skill set too, so she can take great advantage of this. Rally Strength itself is also very nice to have access to, and having it from the start of the game and not having to do anything to unlock it, along with the fact it doesn't take up an ability slot, is actually pretty useful. And the fact that it continues to almost scale up as the game progresses and you get access to more rallies just means it retains its relevance quite well. It's nothing flashy or exciting, but it does give Annette some very useful and somewhat unique early contributions that can continue to prosper. Annette has the minor crest of Dominic, which gives her a 10% chance to conserve a spellcast when using magic. This is never something that is going to hurt, unlike some crests where the effects can unintentionally be detrimental. There are no downsides to this activating at all. It doesn't line up the best with Annette's spell list. There isn't really anything you are desperate to conserve, but it can be helpful early on when cast can be very limited, although the chance of it activating is slim. All in all though, this is a small but useful advantage for Annette. Having a crest also means Annette doesn't take damage when using relic weapons or equipment, which is nice, and it also has an additional effect when using the associated weapon, Crusher, by granting the combat art Dust. This adds 20 might to the weapon's already formidable 18, and retains the bonus of working as magic damage. It also deals bonus damage to dragons. This, in short, hits really hard to an enemy's resistance, which tends to be lower than their defense in most cases, meaning most enemies you click on with this will probably just get deleted from the map. Having access to such a powerful kill tool is always going to be a very nice option. Annette has quite a quiet spread of skills. She has boons in axes, reason and authority, and banes in bows and heavy armor. There isn't too much going on here, but what is present is actually quite impactful. The two banes can have minor impacts, but are unlikely to be too devastating. The main thing they can be useful for is some certifications, but the requirements are either so low that you can push into them anyway, or you have alternate options that can be used in place of these. Annie is a magically oriented unit, so having a boon in Reason is incredibly valuable, helping her reach many useful classes. Unfortunately, she doesn't have one in Faith, which means accessing this portion of her spell list will require some extra investment. Speaking of her spell list, she is billed as a mage, so this is an important area of her kit. So let's take a look into that in a bit more depth. The first thing to note here is that despite being presented as a mage, unlike a lot of these, she only gets 8 spells, 4 in each school of magic, meaning she has slightly less options. Her reason pool is mostly wind-based, meaning they are usually light and accurate. At the C rank, she gets Cutting Gale, which has 7 might, 1-2 range, 95 accuracy, and weighs 5. Then bizarrely, at the B rank she gets Sagite, which has 7 might, 1-2 range, 90 accuracy, and weighs 6. The latter here is mostly redundant, but it does have more uses. Both are accurate light chip spells, relatively standard stuff. Excalibur is her A rank reason spell, which packs 11 might, 100 hit, and most importantly, effective damage against flying enemies, meaning it has 33 might against these, making it a very powerful tool in the right situations. Over in Faith, she obviously has the defaults of Heal and Nosferatu, and then at the C rank she unlocks Recover, another one-range spell which lets Annette heal an ally, just this time for more than the regular heal option. It's not the best thing in the world, but sometimes you just need to heal more HP, and this is useful for those scenarios, even if they can be few and far between. At A Faith, Annette gets her highest might spell, Abraxas. Unless you are targeting flying enemies, this will be the spell that deals the most damage, but even then 14 is not great, especially at only 2 casts per map by default. There are some semi-useful things in Annette's spell list, but nothing here that is actually that desirable. Early game reliable chip damage, especially hitting on an enemy's resistance, is nice, and the high might spell against flyers holds usefulness, but it's nothing extraordinary. It doesn't help that one of the most common flying enemy variants, Pegasus or Falconites, generally have very decent resistance stats, and can potentially still eat these hits because of this. There's just nothing in her spell list where unlocking it makes her come online, and that leaves her spell list in a very awkward spot. This brings us on to Annette's axes, and I'm going to cut right to the chase here. At the C+ rank she gets Lightning Axe, and this is very, very good. This combat art is classed as a magic attack, meaning it is fueled by her magic stat and hits on an enemy's resistance. Alongside this, it adds 4 might to the attack, as well as 30% of Annette's resistance stat. Whilst this isn't a particularly great area for Annie, it's a few extra points of damage. Even with her base stats, clicking on this with an Iron Axe Plus will do the same damage as Abraxas, her highest might spell. With a Steel Axe, it outclasses it, and it goes without saying that there are much more powerful options than a Steel Axe. This is an incredibly strong option, and having it come online at C+ means you can get it very early in the game if you invest into it. When so much of her spell list are pretty much just raw damage options, this can invalidate them quite a bit, although not completely, as her wind-based spells still hold a sizable accuracy advantage. Of course, the Axe Boon can also hold other benefits, such as class options, easier access to prowess skills, and being able to utilise a Bolt Axe, a 14 might magic-based axe which, when forged, becomes 1 to 3 range, which requires B axes to equip. On the whole, this boon is a massive benefit to Annette, which can really help her out on the damage front. Annette's last boon is in Authority. First things first, this is always going to be very beneficial for allowing her to make use of any battalions she may want to without needing too much investment or time. This can allow her to accelerate her stats, thanks to the bonuses provided by these, and make use of powerful options earlier than most, increasing accuracy, damage, or just allowing for the support provided by the gambits. For Annie specifically though, there are some very useful tools packed away in this area which are a huge part of some build options that she has. These come in the form of rallies, which synergize excellently with rally strength from her personal ability. The key thing to note is that when you press rally, it applies all rallies that the unit has equipped. At the D rank she gets rally resistance, at the C+ rank she gets rally speed, and all the way up at the S rank she gets rally movement. Rally speed is the key one here, alongside rally strength from her personal ability. The option to give 4 strength and speed to an ally, especially as early in the game as these can be gotten, can be extremely beneficial in a whole ton of scenarios, and lets her aid her allies massively. There isn't really a whole ton more to say about Annie's skill spread. It's quite a quiet one that doesn't affect too many areas. However, all of the boons can be incredibly impactful and provide some very useful things, whether that be the actual tools provided by the skills themselves, or the access to things that these skills provide, such as classes, prowess skills, or battalions. Overall, this is a positive area of Annette as a unit, and whilst you do wish she got a little more in benefits, she really does squeeze a lot out of the few boon areas. Moving on to look at Annette's stats, where the most important area is her magic, which is fairly solid at 11 base with a 50% growth, allowing her to take advantage of any magical tools she may wish to, with a reasonable degree of effectiveness. Whilst her 7 speed is nothing incredible, due to how light some of her spells are, she can use this to avoid being doubled by a decent number of enemies, and to effectively double slower foes, such as armor or fortress knights. Her strength is slightly better than a lot of mages with 6 base and a 30% growth, offsetting some of this very low weight. Annie is pretty frail, which is something to bear in mind. Her HP, defense, and res are all on the lower side, and this can leave her very vulnerable to enemy attacks, so you will have to be careful to keep her out of harm's way, because there is a solid chance that any opponent who is able to double her will bring her down. Whilst her growths won't do too much to fix this, you can make use of some class options which are available to her to bolster some of these areas, which can help her out. Other than these, most of Annette's stats are relatively middle of the road. On the whole, her stats do the job they need to, but they aren't anything extraordinary. One last thing to mention is that Annette does have 2 might supports, one with Mercedes and another with Gilbert. These can be used to amplify her damage or for her to amplify theirs, should you find it helpful. If you don't plan on using one of these units, making them Annette's adjutant can be a helpful way to still have them contribute by giving Annette just a little extra damage. Both of these supports are capable of reaching the A rank, so can get to the maximum bonus of 3 additional damage being given. Before we get into using Annette from a gameplay perspective, I will preface with this. She is a very odd unit in terms of her actual usability. She basically has 3 paths that she can go down, and they all vary wildly from one another in some way, shape or form, and they do all, to some extent, result in one period of her play being weaker in exchange for her others being stronger. Rather than the usual route of going through her early, mid and then late game, I'm just going to start by going straight into the different builds she has. We are going to kick off with one of the most unique builds in the game, which is Annette's utility build. This is fueled primarily by 2 things: her access to incredible rallies, particularly rally strength and speed, and her authority boon giving her some very good battalion access. This lets her be an incredibly strong contributor to your team without her having to directly contribute to combat, by buffing up your other team members to allow them to thrive off the back of Annette. Her personal ability basically being rally strength helps with this a lot, since she has this by default, and as such is able to make use of it as early as chapter 1 if you've started with the Blue Lions. I think she can be a very solid consideration for this map, as it lets you have a unit who contributes well whilst also allowing you to funnel your EXP into 4 units rather than 5, so these essentially get fast tracked up the levels and lets them get off the mark much quicker. Rally Strength also lets units like Byleth, Dimitri and Felix contribute very well on this early chapter and can open up potential 1 rounds for them. With this in mind, it should come as no surprise that the first big aim here is to push for Rally Speed to allow her to make use of that too. As previously mentioned, rallying provides all buffs from currently equipped rallies, so you get to take advantage of all of them along the way, including rally resistance, which will be picked up on the path to this for situations where it may be useful. Thanks to the boon in this area and the E+ base, reaching this should not be a problem at all and should be able to be done in quite a short amount of time. Once you have rally strength and rally speed, Annette can provide very large buffs to units which have a lot of combat impact, particularly on certain units such as Felix or Ingrid, who can be very close to doubling thresholds in a lot of scenarios, and an increase of 4 to 5 attack speed can push them over the edge, and therefore allow them to 1 round. It's also worth remembering that these buffs stay active on the enemy phase, so can be made use of there too, to provide some extra damage or even kill potential, and extra survivability thanks to the speed. Now we have to talk about the big downside of rallies. Using a rally gives the user 0 experience and takes up their turn. This means that if Annette is frequently using rallies, she is not going to be gaining any experience, and as a result, will struggle to keep up both in terms of stats but also class thresholds. This is why if you want to really heavily lean into this, it can make it hard for Annette to pivot into a build which contributes more directly later, since she will have a lot of catching up to do. That being said, catching up is absolutely possible. You will just need to make use of things like using her as an adjutant on high contribution units, such as enemy phase combatants, and potentially giving her tools, such as an experience or knowledge gem, to let her bring her EXP and weapon ranks back into line with the rest of your party without taking too much time. Again, for the context of these videos, we are assuming no grinding, but if you choose to do that, then catching her up is much easier. However, let's assume you don't want to do that for a second. You could always just bench her. Make use of her rallies early on, and then let her be replaced by later recruits when you get to them. This is also completely valid if you just want to use her for the short term, but within the context of the video, how do you use Annette? Put her on the bench probably isn't the advice people are looking for, although it does deserve mention that even if you don't plan on using Annette for the long haul, she still contributes very well early on whilst consuming basically no resources, including kill EXP or class mastery from combat participation. But if you wanted to keep using Annette as a high utility, very low investment unit, there is a valid path. Firstly though, we need to talk about battalions and gambits. Because of her authority boon, raised base, and high desire to invest into this area anyway, Annette is almost always free to make use of any gambits which are available at the time. Because in this path she does not contribute much to combat, she also doesn't really care about any negative stat debuffs that can sometimes be provided by these. This can be very beneficial with utility gambits. Things like Stride early on can be great for her to hang on to, and as you get further in, other strong gambits such as Retribution, Impregnable Wall, or Blessing can also be ideal for her to use. There is one choice that overshadows them all for the late game however, particularly if you are using her in her home house, which is the Dance of the Goddess Gambit, which is most accessible through the A rank battalion Blue Lions Dancers. Other choices are present, but extremely late in the game and can be quite out of the way. Dance of the Goddess is basically like using the dance command, but on up to 4 units at once, in a Tetris T-block shape in front of the user, letting you refresh their turns and allowing them to move again. This is stupidly good, and one of, if not the best gambit in the game. As previously mentioned, the Blue Lions Dancers requires an A rank in authority to equip, which makes Annie ideal here since in this path, she invests heavily into this area anyway. The battalion is also ground locked, so it cannot be used with flying units. Another issue with the battalion is that initially it provides some very heavy debuffs, giving -5 to both physical and magical damage. For most units this would be very bad, but for the utility focused Annette here it really isn't that big of a problem, since she is not damage oriented in the slightest. These debuffs do get better as the battalion levels up, eventually only giving -1 to both magical and physical damage. However, this still isn't ideal for a damage focused unit, since you actually lose a lot more than 1 damage from not being equipped with a battalion that gives a large might bonus. Now there is one question left to be answered. In this route where Annette is so starved of EXP, what class should she be in? Well, the answer is the highest move class available for a low amount of EXP, Cavalier. This provides 7 move, allowing for great mobility around the battlefield, whilst also being available at just level 10. It also has very low requirements of just C lances and D riding, which can also be gambled lower if you wish too. On top of this, the class is also grounded, allowing for the Blue Line Dancers to be used, and it provides Canto, which can allow Annette to reposition or retreat following her action, which when considering her low level giving her very low stats, can be very important. Now let's be clear, in this build Annette will have a very low volume of meaningful contributions, but what those contributions actually are, in particular the use of Dance of the Goddess, can be extremely high impact, and something that does bring a lot of value to your team. In addition to this, Annette taking very few resources allows the rest of your squad to take significantly more, leading to them having advantages here too. Whilst this doesn't let Annie shine too much individually, it does let her elevate your team significantly. I really enjoy this build option. It lets her have incredible contributions early, and the repercussions of not receiving any EXP for this can be navigated in a way that still lets her contribute in a very effective way. The build is also incredibly low cost, only requiring D riding, C lances, and A authority at most, along with getting to level 10, meaning that it's incredibly easy for her to get what she needs and never has to go out of her way to get any of this. That being said, there are other builds that Annie can use that allow her to contribute more directly, so let's take a look into those. Going right back to the beginning of the game, you are still going to want to make use of rallies and Annie's authority quite heavily. They still provide a ton of value for the time. Just make sure you give her some kills and EXP along the way too. One thing that can help with this is pushing her faith up early to grab heal. Whilst it does have some in-map applications, the main benefit is that it can also be used as an extra EXP source for Annette, letting her grab just a little more now and again, and all it requires is D-Faith. The first big tool that Annette is going to want here is Lightning Axe from C+ Axes. This gives Annette a huge damage spike and makes her an extremely legitimate threat to almost any enemy she comes across, especially at the point in time when you get this, which will be between chapters 4 and 6, depending on how much priority you focus here. There are also some other tools that can be useful to pick up early, such as Rally Speed from Authority, or some more spells from both her Reason and Faith spell lists. When Annie hits level 5, Monk will be her ideal class choice. She is able to reach this from base thanks to her Reason rank, so you don't have to worry about raising anything to be able to pick up this certification. This is the only beginner class able to use magic, which makes it the obvious choice, and when mastered it grants the ability Magic +2. In case it wasn't already obvious, this gives 2 additional magic, which is just a nice bit of extra damage. You also get Drawback, a positional combat art which allows the user to move themselves and an adjacent ally back 1 tile each, allowing for more movement opportunities. At level 10, before we go into the actual useful class at this point, it's worth mentioning Armor Knight. This requires C axes and D heavy armor to guarantee the qualification. However, since you will already have the axes from getting Lightning Axe, then all you will need to do is pick up the heavy armor, which can be gambled at E+. The reason to go into this is its base defense stat of 12, which Annette's own defense will be raised to upon certification, providing her with a notable amount more bulk. On average, Annie will have between 6 and 7 defense by now, so this is a 5 to 6 point stat boost most of the time, and all you have to go out of your way for is 40 weapon EXP into heavy armor. As for the class Annette actually wants to use here, that would be Mage, which requires C reason for a guaranteed certification. This allows Annie to use her spells whilst using the class, as well as providing an additional point of magic while she is here. When mastered, the class also grants Fiendish Blow, which provides an additional 6 magic damage whenever the user initiates combat, which can be a very appreciated damage spike. The one drawback of Mage at this point is its very low movement, which can make getting into range to make use of Lightning Axe quite difficult, which can be a bit problematic, but it's worth the trade-off. Another option which becomes available to Annie at level 20 is either Warlock or Bishop. These aren't particularly great for Annie to actually use since their low move heavily impedes Lightning Axe's usefulness. However, they do have very good base resistance stats of 15, which will be slightly higher than where Annette typically is at this point in time. Not only does this provide a little bit of extra bulk for her, but potentially an extra point or two of Lightning Axe damage as well. You will also want to look at picking up one of the accuracy boosting abilities, either Hit plus 20 from mastering Archer, or Uncanny Blow from mastering Valkyrie. The former involves pushing through a Bane area to the D+ rank, where you can then gamble an Archer qualification. When this class is mastered, you get the ability which gives 20 additional hits to all attacks. Mastering Archer can be a little awkward, but you can either capitalise on Lightning Axe, or just make Annie an adjutant. Either works perfectly well. As for Uncanny Blow, this requires Valkyrie to be mastered, which has requirements of B Riding and B Reason. This provides a bonus of 30 hits, however only when the user initiates combat. This is also an advanced class, which means whilst you don't have to fight through a Bane, the requirements are a fair bit higher to quite an impactful degree. You also need level 20 to acquire the class, and it requires 150 class EXP to master, so you will get access to this much later. However, it is a better class for Annette to be in, providing additional range on her spells, a +4 magic modifier, 6 move, Canto, and access to her spell list. Whichever one of these you choose to go for is up to you, both have their merits and downsides. Archer is available much earlier, but is also a worse class for Annette to spend time in, offering very little for her, as opposed to Valkyrie, which requires more investment and time to reach, but in return the class serves her much better for her stay in it. The investment from both of these has the potential to play more impact for your future pathing. It depends on what you want to do with her, so this may play a role too. Here is where another branch of options presents itself, which leads towards Annette's final class pathing. You can either look to keep making use of her spell list, or look to take full advantage of Lightning Axe. I'll cover the former first, which leads to more options. Well, to be fair, these don't necessarily have to be options. You can open up all of these fairly reasonably, and pick the most appropriate for any given map. Valkyrie pops back up here as a strong choice, due to a lot of the advantages mentioned earlier, which Annie can really appreciate. The other option is Dark Flyer, requiring B+ Reason and C Flying, which offers better mobility and Black Tome Fair, which increases the damage of her black magic spells by 5, but does not have a magic modifier, so does not benefit axes. It also does not bring the range enhancer that Valkyrie does. Another thing to consider is that you will need a flying battalion for Dark Flyer, whereas Valkyrie is free to use a grounded option. There is only one ideal flying battalion for mages, the Nouvelle Flying Corps, so if this is already in use, it can leave Annie in a rough spot. At level 30, another class option presents itself in Dark Knight, requiring C Lancers, B+ Reason, and A Riding for the certification to be locked in, although you can gamble this lower. This provides 7 move, Canto, Black Tome Fair, and a magic modifier of 2. It is also grounded, meaning it doesn't need to rely on flying battalions. This class can definitely be useful at times, but I don't think it's strictly an upgrade over the 2 advanced options, although 7 move whilst being grounded can definitely have its moments, and it's worth picking up for an option when you need it. By going with any of Valkyrie, Dark Flyer, or Dark Knight, you will retain access to Annie's spell list, giving her some nice chip options as well as a little bit of healing utility. You also still get a decent amount of move to make use of Lightning Axe, and you can also make use of her rallies should you wish to, although you may not have the room in her abilities to equip some of them. In this path, an ability set of Reason Prowess, Axe Prowess, Fiendish Blow, Magic +2, and one of the Accuracy abilities would be ideal, although you can obviously rotate these as you wish to. And at the latter stages, you may wish to add in Black Magic Range +1. That about wraps up her spell-based build, but she does have one other option which is focused around her axes, such as the Lightning Axe combat art, the Bolt Axe, and her relic weapon, Crusher. To make the use of these, you have to sacrifice the use of her spell list, but the benefits you can receive from this can be very large. This takes her class pathing down the Wyvern route, going into Wyvern Rider first at the advanced stage. The class requires B axes and C flying, which isn't too hard to obtain, especially considering you will have already wanted C+ axes for Lightning Axe, and pushing it higher will only serve to benefit you, by granting higher levels of Axe Prowess and access to the Bolt Axe. Reaching C flying isn't too much trouble by this point either, although if you did want to save on investment, you can gamble this rank as low as D if you wanted to, but reaching these requirements by level 20 is no real trouble. Wyvern Rider grants Axe Fair, which is hugely beneficial to the axe-based attacks thanks to its additional 5 damage. The class also grants 7 move, flight, and canto, making it easy to get in and out in order to take full advantage of Lightning Axe, whilst maintaining safety afterwards. As mentioned earlier, Bolt Axes can be used as a ranged option. If you chose to go for Archer earlier, there is also the potential to push up to a B rank to make use of a Magic Bow, which alongside the range can provide effective damage against flying opponents. Of course, Wyvern Rider is not the last step for this path. At level 30, Wyvern Lord becomes available, with requirements of A Axes, A Flying, and C Lancers. This is still very attainable, especially by the time Annette reaches level 30, and whilst this is extremely similar to Wyvern Rider, the extra point of move is extremely appreciated for better maneuverability, and honestly there isn't any reason not to take the upgrade on this. Whilst the requirements are high, since it's a masterclass, you can be missing quite a lot and still gamble the certification. This is a very one-dimensional build. Its job is to hit enemies on their resistance with an axe for absolutely massive amounts of damage. Whilst it does sacrifice quite a lot, including her spell list and some flexibility in battalions since she must use a flying option, it does perform exceedingly well at what it sets out to do, and will make Annie a threat to basically any enemy, with the exception being the couple that stack resistance. However, even in those cases, they tend to be quite frail in terms of actual HP, so typically can still be brought down. Now to be fair, the class can have other smaller impacts beyond this. For example, 8 move with Canto can allow for Annie to still be very mobile with her rallies, which can still be made use of, but this pales in comparison to the impact of her player phase combat. If you were to settle in this, your skill set would likely look something like Axe Prowess, Fiendish Blow, Magic +2, one of the Accuracy abilities, and the last spot being flexible between things like Rally Speed or Lance Breaker. I personally am a big fan of this last build, but any of these are valid options for her, and can lead to her being a great asset to any roster, with a lot of very strong and quite unique early game contributions, with some solid flexibility and many different roles she can fulfill later down the line. That's about it for Annette. I hope this helps you to get the most out of her. I would once again like to thank the people who have backed the channel on Patreon. I really appreciate the support. When this video goes live, the poll for the next unit in the series to be released will still be running, which as of this video is now open to every remaining unit who has not yet been covered. So if you want to have your say, you can do so for just £1, which lets you vote on all of these for a month. If you want to discuss this video, the channel, or Fire Emblem in general, consider joining the Discord, a link to which is in the description. Thank you very much for watching.